Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today's programming. So it's my great pleasure to introduce today's topic, Black Philanthropy. We'll be exploring the rich history and how you can make a difference in the lives of millions of Black Americans now and for generations to come. My name is Kevin Scally, and I'm the Chief Relationship Officer at Charity Navigator. Joining me today, we have Aisha Alexander-Young and Valeda Fullwood, two experts in the world of philanthropy. Aisha and Valeda, how are you both doing today?
Doing well, Kevin. Thank you. Happy to be here with you all.
Yeah, feeling the same.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor to host you both today. And for our audience, I'll just give you quick backgrounds on Aisha and Valeda. Aisha is a context creator, a systems disruptor, and community organizer whose career is focused on the intersection of race, place, and opportunity. She has held leadership positions in philanthropy, local government, grassroots organizations, and small and large nonprofits. Before joining Giving Gap, Aisha served as the Vice President for Strategy and Equity at the Meyer Foundation, where she led efforts to integrate racial equity and justice into all areas of the foundation's work. Prior to her tenure at Meyer, Aisha was the Director of Thought Leadership for Kaboom and held several leadership positions with the City of Charlotte and Dream Defenders. And she currently serves as the on the board of directors for the Association of Black Foundation Executives. So, Aisha, quite the introduction. Anything else that that I didn't mention that you'd like to share with the audience?
No, I think the only thing I always have to tell people is that I'm a Southerner by birth, and that always colors how I experience the world and how I come to the world of philanthropy.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. And Valeda is described as an idea whisperer, which is an awesome term. And she is an award-winning author of Giving Back. It's a 400-page hardcover book profiling stories of philanthropy among African Americans that was developed with photographer Charles Thomas. And throughout today's event, you will see some of those photos, which they're just striking and beautiful. This book has been reimagined as a multimedia exhibit titled The Soul of Philanthropy that has been hosted by 25 groups and communities and continues to tour cities nationwide. She's also co-founder of New Generation of African American Philanthropists, and that is Chicago, North Carolina's Black Philanthropic Collective. Valeda, I mean, obviously, incredible CV on your end too, and see such an incredible expert. Anything else that you'd share with the group that wants to learn a little bit more about you?
Certainly, I'll just clarify. It's Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm based in Charlotte, and I'm part of NGAP, which is a philanthropic collective here in Charlotte. And I'm just thrilled to be here today with Aisha. I too have Southern roots, and always say I have Southern roots, but global sight. So I keep it open, and I'm proud of those roots.
Like that. So, like I mentioned, today we'll be talking about the history of Black philanthropy. We'll also be talking about the Giving Gap, which might be a new term for some of you, but you'll walk away fully prepared to understand what that is and how you can help close it. And then we'll be giving you some resources and some key ways that you can make a difference moving forward. And like I mentioned earlier, for those joining us live today, we will be hosting a Q&A. So if you have questions throughout the event, please feel free to throw those in there, and our colleague Stacy will be answering those and surfacing them to me a little bit later on. So one of the things that I wanted to start with was just this quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And you know, February is Black History Month, and this is a time to celebrate all of the accomplishments and achievements of Black Americans. But it's really important to celebrate those throughout the entire year. So of course there's a spotlight now, but just wanted to emphasize that, you know, this is not something that, you know, should be limited to 1 month. It should be all year round. And associated with that, some of you joining might be familiar with our work with Giving Gap. We've partnered with them for 2 years now, and we've developed a list of Black-founded nonprofits. And you'll understand, you know, as we work through this, the importance of Black-founded nonprofits specifically. And we have 29 star rated nonprofits on Charity Navigator. So these are 3 and 4 star rated organizations, the ones with Give with Confidence. And you can sort through those and support them directly through our giving basket. One of the other really interesting things, and you'll learn more about this from Aisha as well, is that you have the ability to submit nonprofits that you may know to be included into Giving Gap's database and also to be featured as part of Charity Navigator's Hot Topic as well. And so, Valeda, I'd really like to start with you, about, generally, like, how do you view philanthropy and how that might differ from general perceptions?
Right. I view philanthropy, I go to the Greek meaning, the deconstructing that meaning, it's love of what it means to be human, or love of humankind, as we often say, but I like to deconstruct it even further to say love of what it means to be human. And that's been my definition and how I choose to practice philanthropy with love at the center.
That's quite beautiful. I mean, most people, when they think of the world of philanthropy, they think you need to be a multimillionaire or a billionaire to give. But, really, when you boil it down to its roots and talk about, the love of humanity and wanting to give back, really anybody can be a philanthropist.
That's the way I see it. I see it as a reclamation of that root meaning and going back to the heart of it. And I think oftentimes we get distracted by how many zeros are behind the dollar sign. And while, of course, dollars are essential to help drive the changes we want to see and offer the support we want to see in our communities, I think it's even more potent when you bring your heart to it, as well as your mind and strategic thinking.
And Aisha, certainly, you're no stranger to the world of philanthropy. You've worked in a variety of different ways. Just curious as to, when somebody asks you if, essentially, how to become a philanthropist or what is a philanthropist, what are some of the ways that you address that with the folks that you interface with?
Right. As I mentioned earlier, I think the most potent philanthropy is really when you bring your full self. I think if it were the dollars alone, we would have created a lot of the change we want to see, but we know it requires more than just dollars. And so when we bring our mind, I mean, I think of it visually, as reflected in the book, an exhibit that you mentioned earlier. We bring our minds, strategic thinking, analysis, what we know, wisdom. We bring our heart in terms of what we have an affinity for, what moves us, and we bring our hands in all the ways you can help with your hands, whether it's writing a check or patting somebody on the back or driving them to an appointment or feeding people. I really explore all those ways when I look to support a cause or an organization. How can I bring myself to this work and really advance it?
It's beautifully said, and I'm sure resonates with a lot of folks too. Aisha, you specifically, as philanthropy is evolving, with different people getting involved, and even the rise of things like mutual aid, very curious as to how you view philanthropy at this point.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I've realized over the course of my career is the first philanthropists I ever knew were actually my grandparents. They would not call themselves philanthropists by any stretch of the imagination, nor are they maybe what people would imagine or picture when they think of philanthropists. But I think of, the stories of my grandfather, who one was always providing people with free meals. He owned a restaurant, and if you didn't have something to eat, you could always come into his restaurant and get a free meal, no questions asked. He would also sponsor young Black boys that looked like him to be able to go to the YMCA for summer camp, because he never had some of those opportunities. He helped lead the way to build a football stadium for the all-Black public high school in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Valeda is. My grandmother sewed dresses for all the girls in church so they could look stylish if they couldn't afford the style of that day. And so I think that that's really how I come to philanthropy, is knowing it as this community and family tradition where communities have had to take care of one another, particularly Black communities where systems have failed us, where systems have undermined our communities. We've always had to find a way out of no way. So that way has been through caring for one another, that love of humanity that Valeda was speaking of, which is ultimately philanthropy. As I've grown and worked in the philanthropic sector, I've seen, how institutional philanthropy works, and have learned a lot about that work as well. But ultimately, I see the small individual donor, the everyday giver, as the one that can influence both the communities on the ground, and the way that institutional philanthropy works is by putting a mandate on institutional philanthropy and what they care about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Just a little anecdote about your grandparents. I mean, that really struck a chord with me. And, I imagine that, even some of the folks that are tuning in now kind of shift in and be like, yeah, you know what, granddad and grandmom, they were philanthropists in their own way. Maybe they didn't position themselves that, but it definitely, definitely sets the stage and also just about how people can even position themselves in current day. Well, Valeda, I would love to, we'll skip ahead just a little bit here, but just talk a little bit about, your book and some of the historian work that you've done. We're just so grateful to have you here because you are considered such an expert in the world of philanthropy, and would love to know kind of the origins of it all.
Yes, certainly. Aisha touched on it for sure. Her story with her family resonates with me, and in fact, animated my work in philanthropy. I've worked in the field as a consultant, both with philanthropic institutions and also with community-based organizations. And I was always struck by the absence of our stories from the African American community, our stories of philanthropy. Again, it seemed a very narrow focus exclusively on ultra wealthy white men. And I knew a bigger story, a different story, and thought we should widen the lens on this conversation around philanthropy and to include the stories of Black people as benefactors, not only as beneficiaries. And so that seemed to be the prevailing story. And I wanted to flip the script, and being inspired by the philanthropy, though it wasn't called philanthropy, but philanthropy that I saw all around me in my community. And that ignited the idea for the book, Giving Back. I had seen white papers and academic pieces around this thing called Black Philanthropy and was intrigued by it because I knew it and had lived through it. But I wanted to create something that was more accessible to everyday givers and to people who didn't work in institutional philanthropy. So that seeded the idea for Giving Back, a tribute to generations of African American philanthropists. And for many people who believe Black philanthropy is a oxymoron, I intentionally linked the language, the everyday language around giving and giving back, to the bigger, more sophisticated or elevated language of philanthropy and being a philanthropist. And spent 5 years interviewing Black givers across the country to hear their stories of giving. And as mentioned earlier, partnered with photographer Charles Thomas, who's actually a professional in philanthropy today. And he captured poignant imagery around what giving is in Black communities and lifting up that love of humanity that shows up so often in how we choose to give and have an impact in our communities. And I always like to level set with folks that, particularly when I'm talking about philanthropy and much of the work around Black philanthropy, it's not as simple as just a Black person writing a check. We're really talking deeper heritage, cultural traditions that are grounded in Black culture, and folks often say it's in our DNA. It's not exclusive to Black people, but it certainly is predominant in terms of the values that show up in our giving. And in short, there are really 4 really defining ones. And one of those is giving through a social justice lens, giving more than money and more. I often say we supersize our 3 T's. We give time, talent, and treasure. And we also bring our ties and relationships in community, and we bring our truth or our stories and testimony to help affect change. And that's a defining aspect. The third aspect is this sense of mutuality, that we're giving out of acknowledging each other's humanity, not so much, helping those in need, because oftentimes we see ourselves in those people in need. And the giving, as a result, the giving isn't always out of abundance, but many times it's sacrificial, where we're really giving up something in order to help somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that's such a beautiful way to put it. And Again, it sounded like you added an extra T there. Everyone, many of us are familiar with the time, talent, and treasure, but I like the truth side of it coming through too. That's very cool.
Yeah, added a couple of T's. Yeah, like I said, we supersize it.
Very much so. Well, good. I would love to hear, some reflections on, some key figures or some pivotal moments in history, that really have helped advance philanthropy amongst Black communities.
Right. Yeah, I love sharing these stories because they're unsung heroes in my mind that really inspire me. And I only learned about them when I began the work around the book Giving Back, that there are these stories in our history that most of us don't know about. And in fact, since it is Black History Month, I'm reminded of the quote by the historian Robert Thompson that says, until you know how African you are, you will never know how American you are. So there's so many elements of American culture that are woven into our lives and ways of doing and being as Americans that we don't even realize its roots. And certainly Black philanthropy is one of those examples. And one of the stories that inspires me, I call it my historical crush, are on two men who founded the Free African Society, and that's Absalon Jones and Richard Allen. And they were leaders and founders of Black churches. Absalon Jones eventually became the first Black Episcopal priest. Richard Allen founded the African American or the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or AME Church. But they took note or made their mark on history during the 1793 yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia, which in this pandemic we can identify with the crisis that existed at that time, that people were becoming sick and dying. And in that moment, it was believed that people of African descent were immune to yellow fever. And so city leaders, Benjamin Rush being one of them, one of the forefathers of our country, came to these Black leaders and asked for their help in tending to the sick and dying. And so Absalon Jones and Richard Allen mobilized members of the Free African Society, which was a mutual aid society, and provided assistance to the sick and dying, helped bring men together, hire men to carry away the dead bodies, and stayed and nursed people who were grieving and were very sick. And it became apparent pretty quick that Black people were not immune to yellow fever, but yet the Free African Society members stayed and helped bring the city through that crisis. And at that time, Philadelphia was our largest city in America, and only a few years after we became an independent country. So I see them as framers of what we've come to know as American philanthropy in terms of how they mobilize to assist during a crisis and provide relief. So those are some inspirations. Another is Catherine Ferguson, again, a woman born enslaved, was able to buy her freedom. And while she lost a husband and children due to some of the hardships of being an enslaved person, and during that era, she rose to become a recognized philanthropist in Philadelphia. And I encourage you to Google her and learn more of her story, but it's quite inspiring. And one of the threads is that how she gave what she did not have. This was an illiterate woman who recognized the power of education and reading and established Sunday schools for child laborers, Black and white, to learn how to read, a skill she did not have, yet saw the value of it. And one of the other stories, more recent, is with Georgia Gilmore, who was a noted cook during the Montgomery boycott in 1955. And she mobilized a group of Black women that cooked meals to provide to people and to raise money. So she fed a movement in more ways than one. And she called her group that she assembled the Club from Nowhere, and was really a central figure during that civil rights movement. and she's an unheralded philanthropist. And all of these stories exemplify ways Black Americans have helped lead change, invested in community, and frame what we know and are proud of in terms of American philanthropy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for walking us through that. Aisha, I love obviously, over the past couple of years, there's been such a focus on Black issues and, the compounding nature of the pandemic. And would just love it if there was any sort of kind of modern historical moments that you really feel were the catalyst for, the organization that now has been developed of Giving Gap. I know that the organization is just about 2 years old. So we'd love to talk a little bit about the origins of your organization.
Absolutely. So my organization, Giving Gap, which was originally founded as Give Black, was wholly inspired by the racial justice uprising that happened in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And what one of our co-founders, Christina Lewis, who is a philanthropist in her own right, the daughter of a brilliant man who was also a philanthropist, Reginald F. Lewis, what she came to realize in the time of the racial justice uprising and the compounded impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that was disproportionately impacting Black communities was there was a lot of motivation for people to give and to donate to organizations. And at the same time, people were having trouble identifying Black-led, Black-founded organizations to give to, or, the realization that, these issues are disproportionately impacting Black communities, and we need to be supporting the Black-founded nonprofits that are on the ground in these communities doing work to lift them up. And what really just started as a viral Instagram post that turned into a Google sheet that turned into what is now today our organization, Giving Gap. And we, as you said, Kevin, we partnered with Charity Navigator over the past couple of years. And what we are is a platform for people to be able to connect and learn about Black-founded nonprofits and to give to them directly because of this massive giving gap that exists. And what we have realized as an organization, and I can talk about this further, but there are billions of dollars that go to charity and to nonprofit organizations every single year. Yet there is a tiny portion of that actually goes to Black-founded nonprofits. And that has to do with a lot of reasons, the same reasons that the wealth gap persists, and some of the other gaps that exist in Black communities. It's really connected to many of the same reasons that are systemic, but also related to relationship capital and people just not knowing, what they don't know. And so we really wanted to create a hub where people can learn about and give directly to Black-founded nonprofits.
Thank you so much for walking us through that. Aisha, Valeda and I were recently part of a conversation where we were talking about the future of the Giving Gap, both as an organization as well as closing the Giving Gap. And it really was just fascinating to think about, the actions that we're taking now and their implications 20 years from now. So just, would love for you to kind of reflect on that. And Valeda, it would be great to have you chime in as well about, the ideal future, of that Giving Gap and the steps that folks can take now to help close it.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I would call out, and certainly, our organization, Giving Gap, was founded in the wake of a crisis. I've been in the philanthropic sector for many years, and what I have witnessed both in the philanthropic sector as both a person who is making decisions about funding and as a nonprofit leader, the person who's asking for resources from the philanthropic sector and from donors, is often giving to Black communities and Black-led nonprofits, Black-founded nonprofits, is motivated by times of crisis and times of trauma. And so, just to give a little bit of a wave of a story, we're 10 years this year since the murder of Trayvon Martin. And at that time, I was working in nonprofit organizations and saw an influx of funding there. We had Mike Brown happen, and there was an influx of funding that happened in that time period. We had just most recently the murder of George Floyd, and we see this big influx of commitments to Black-founded nonprofits. But those commitments tend to wane, and part of the work that we're doing at Giving Gap and why we're saying it's important to close the gap is maybe these times of crisis and these kinds of trauma would not exist or happen as often if we were supporting Black-founded nonprofits and Black communities all of the time. And so the giving to Black-founded nonprofits and Black communities should not be tied to times of trauma. And what does that say to us as a society, that we only value people when they're experiencing trauma? And what does it say about us as a society if we're not thinking about preventing trauma before it happens and investing in communities on a daily basis? We'll talk about action items, but one of the things that I would encourage for all donors is to look at who you're giving to and what does that say about what your values are.
Absolutely, and that's something that we see at Charity Navigator as well, is that we'll see an increase in traffic when there's times of crisis, or when there's certain current events that are happening, and you do see the spike in giving in response to that. But it's unfortunate is that, like, a lot of those situations, whether it's socioeconomic issues, or even in the moments of crisis of a hurricane, it's not a matter of in a couple of days that all gets solved and then everything goes back to normal. It is a matter of that there's very long-term things that need to be resolved. So, Valeda, I'd love to
resiliency. I'm sorry, Kevin, but
no,
we
go ahead.
must be willing to invest in the resiliency of all these communities.
That's absolutely right. Valeda, as you think about the giving gap and what can be done to close it, and kind of thinking forward to that 20-year ideal future, what's your read on what we can do in the now and the situation at large?
Yeah, I get really excited when I think about the vision for 20 years out. If we've been able to come together and to give generously to close the funding gap that presently exists, and the vision that can be fulfilled at a national level, but also the ideas that can be ignited, and the deepening of the work. I mean, Black-founded, Black-led nonprofits serve such a vital role in our communities. Oftentimes, because of the funding gap, they're small. Some of them aren't on ordinary donors and foundations' radar, but they serve as the backbone of many communities, and where people, marginalized people particularly, but not exclusively Black people, where people can go and have a relationship and a connection and gain the services and support and the skills they need to thrive in our communities. So if we're able to close that gap, just what that can activate and the changes we can see. And I also think about the historical precedents. Aisha is on the board of APFI, and their research around the Black-founded, Black-led organizations and the funding gap that exists, and the historical precedents in terms of how these organizations have been instrumental in leading change. Most movements and societal changes that we've seen in America had Black-led organizations at the forefront and a part of that work. Going back to the founding of America, an example I gave earlier with the Free African Society, through abolition, through suffrage, women's suffrage, to the civil rights movement, to the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm sure going forward. So it's not just giving to Black organizations for the sake of it. It's evening the playing field and ensuring that all social change and social impact organizations have the resources to lead change and create change.
Absolutely. So Aisha, we have this slide up here with this kind of bold statement, and I know that there's a couple of bold statements to follow. I'm hoping that you can walk us through this as kind of the current state of philanthropy and how change can be made.
Yes, absolutely. So, as I said, $450 billion, that's a lot. It's kind of staggering to look at that number altogether, but that is the power of philanthropy. And I should mention that the majority of those dollars is not from, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and the like. It's from everyday donors and givers. And as I said, only a tiny percent of a fraction goes to Black organizations. And that is the giving gap that exists. And we as a society have to think about who we value and where our dollars and how we're using our dollars. What does that say about who you value and also about who you don't? We, as Valeda said, know that Black-founded organizations, Black-led organizations have been central in some of the most important advancements in our society. So many different ways and so many different things, but also just the work that's happening in your own backyards and own communities. And we have to make sure that those organizations have the funding, they deserve the funding that they need to achieve their missions. You started, Kevin, with a quote from Dr. King, and one of the things that I like to say, connected back to the work that Giving Gap is doing and the Giving Gap that exists, Dr. King defined power as the ability to achieve your purpose. And what is lacking right now for Black-founded organizations, for Black communities, is their ability to achieve their purpose. They need us, all of us, to share our power and our resources with them so they're able to achieve their purpose. And their purpose is not always just about, and most often not just about Black communities, but it's about the betterment of our society, but making sure that that betterment of our society reaches everyone, inclusive of Black people. And a lot of times Black communities are left out of the conversation. They're seen as just the recipients of welfare and good. But we can be both the change agents and the strategists, particularly in our own communities where cultural capital is really important, and that knowledge, cultural knowledge is really important. And we see a lot of funding going to all sorts of organizations that may not have those relationships in community. And we need to be willing to support the organizations, particularly those smaller ones in your own backyard that are not just working for the benefit of Black communities, but making sure they are including Black communities as central in their work, because we know when Black communities are getting what they need, that means everyone is getting what they need.
That's a great way to frame it. And I think, some of the shifts that we're seeing on Charity Navigator is that there is more of an interest in smaller, more recently established or community-led organizations. And so, that was one of the key drivers of us increasing our ratings. Historically, we had rated 9,000 of America's largest and most well-known charities, but there was a demand from donors and there was also a demand from nonprofits. The donors were to say, hey, well, there's this organization that's in my backyard. I want to support them. And, I don't have that trust indicator that Charity Navigator provides. And certainly the nonprofits, appreciated the ratings that have been provided. And, organizations that were left out were saying like, hey, yeah, I want that trust indicator so I can go out to my either current donors or prospective donors and say you can give with confidence. Aisha and Valeda, I'm curious as to, what you're seeing as far as, kind of greater shifts in the philanthropic world from kind of the size and shape of funder. Aisha, you talked a little bit about, individual giving versus, institutional giving, and just, opening that up for conversation if there's any sort of trends that, you'd share with the folks that are tuning in.
Yeah. I can start. I think one of the things that I'm noticing, and I talked about, some of the different things and instances that have impacted philanthropy, particularly when it has to do with racial justice or social justice philanthropy. But one of the things that I think is a trend that I'm seeing and I hope continues, both in the institutional philanthropy side and with individual donors, is giving with a lot more intention, being more thoughtful, and your users, Covenant for Charity Navigator, certainly are being thoughtful in this way when they're coming and seeking through Charity Navigator, a validator, knowing that they can trust they're doing their due diligence. And the trend that I'm seeing now, and hope will continue, and hope to see more people and organizations put into their due diligence process, is how do organizations impact racial equity? Are their leaders diverse? Do they have people that are a part of their organization that have lived experiences that are connected to the issues that their constituents or the people that they're trying to help are facing? And so I think we're seeing a lot more intentionality when it comes to equity and diversity and inclusion. And we're also seeing organizations do that work on internally as well, and people doing that work internally as well. You know, I said it before and I'll say it again. If nothing else comes from this conversation, I would encourage people to take a deep look at how they are giving and say to themselves, what does this say about who I value, who I think I can trust, who I think is important and worthy of support, and then who is left out. And if there's something in that doesn't sit right with you, that there's something that you need to change about your giving. And certainly would invite people to visit givinggap.org and learn more. We have over 800 Black founded nonprofits on our platform and growing. We verify the organizations on our platform and look at all sorts of criteria, including checking them out through Charity Navigator. We've had over 33,000 users and counting come on our platform to find and learn about Black founded nonprofits. And my favorite emails to receive are the ones that are like, I would have never known about this organization if it weren't for your platform. And now we have this great relationship, and I've been giving and I've been volunteering. And I love getting those emails and conversations from folks. And then $1 million has been raised through our platform, and to give, and we give directly to the organizations. We don't hold funding at all. And so I hope that we can all be more intentional, and that's the trend that I hope to see, is that we're seeking out these organizations very proactively, the organizations that need our support and funding.
Yeah, I would add, building on, again, what Aisha had said, I can speak specifically in my community here in Charlotte. There was a national report that indicated that out of the roughly $500 million in grants that some local fund holders at our community foundation give each year, that only 0.5% went to nonprofits that identify as Black founded or Black led. And so that was disturbing, particularly in a region that has about 25% or more Black people in the greater Charlotte area. So that gap was a shock to many of us. While we sensed it, having actual data to quantify it and was really a motivator. And I think when people know better, it's an opportunity to do better. And so part of our work here at a local level is just bringing awareness. One, using platforms like Giving Gap to spotlight and illuminate the Black-led, Black-founded organizations working in communities across the country, or in your specific community. And then also really to make the case of how wide this gap is and the concerted effort and learning together that it will take to close it over time, and the possibilities that we unlock as we close the gap. So I definitely can identify about the impact and the need for education at a local level. And one trend certainly I've seen across the field is around the power of collective giving, which I spoke of earlier in the terms of a characteristic or part of the history and traditions of Black giving. And there's power in coming together. If you're an everyday giver or a small donor, or just someone who wants to help make a difference, oftentimes forming a giving circle or coming together with family members to give jointly to multiply the impact of your dollars by joining with others. I'm part of a philanthropic collective. This is our 15th year. And certainly learning together and giving together has been really significant. It's what inspired me to write a book, to capture stories on Black philanthropy. And it's also provided opportunities to learn more about this giving gap and the role of Black founded and Black led nonprofits in our community, and a platform to advocate for greater support of these organizations.
Yeah, and I appreciate you reemphasizing that, and certainly the rise of the Giving Circle is just absolutely fascinating, and lovely to hear that yours has been such an established tenet of your community. And so I think that as we kind of reflect on key takeaways here, I mean that's one that really stands with me, and I hope that folks will think about, is that there really is just more than finding the organization and making a gift. Is that it's a matter of following that investment, seeing how that organization flourishes over time, where their needs might be, and also thinking of other ways to give back. And so Valeda had talked about supersizing the teas, and I love that. And Valeda, I'm definitely going to be borrowing that from you in the future. But just thinking about your time, talent, and treasure and trust, and yeah, just finding other ways that you can help. Even if you're not, an uber wealthy person, there's ways that you can make a difference and close the giving gap. So, Valeda and Aisha, we do have a number of questions that came in through the audience. So, I want to spend a little bit of time here. If there's a couple things that you want the folks to take away from this conversation, what would be the top lines, even if it's a reemphasis of some of the things you've already covered?
Go ahead, Aisha.
Yeah, I won't bore you all with it again, but audit your own giving and never underestimate the power of your $1, $5, $10, $20. And also, as Valeda said, pulling that together with your family or your friends or your community, finding a giving circle or founding a giving circle to help support an organization. And then I want to reiterate that giving to Black founded nonprofits and communities should not only be motivated by times of trauma. We have to change that as a society. We have to. That is an imperative and the only way that we're ever going to close this giving gap. Some of the things that we are trying to confront in communities of color that have, been embedded across 400 years, they cannot be solved in a one-year commitment that comes out of a trauma or tragedy. It's going to take long-standing, sustained commitment. And so I would encourage folks to, again, go to givinggap.org, find an organization that aligns with your interests or is in your own backyard, in your community, or suggest one that we don't have on our platform already. We would love to add more. And create a sustained relationship with them, even if it's only giving $5 or $10 a month and committing to them and saying, I'm going to give you $10 a month over the next 5 years. That can make a huge impact for a small organization and nonprofit. Talk about their work, evangelize for them, go out and make sure that others know about the good things that they're doing so that you're helping to attract others as well. Those would be my key takeaways.
Yeah, and takeaways, I would add that, yes, this is Black History Month. And if some of the stories we've shared, some of the examples we've shared from our history have piqued your interest, whether you're Black or not, I encourage you to look it up and research and learn more about these rich traditions, about these unsung philanthropists that have existed in our communities. And then to know that 6 months from now, in August, is Black Philanthropy Month. We're going to the 11th year of celebrating Black Philanthropy Month. And that's an opportunity to invest in our future, invest in our communities, to connect with Black founded, Black led organizations, to contribute to them in all the ways that you can give and support them, and sustain that support over time, and to learn more and to lift up stories of Black giving and the stories of impact of Black-led, Black-founded nonprofits in your community.
Fantastic. Well, we're gonna shift gears, and we've taken some questions. I'm gonna warn you both. Some of these are easier than others. Some of them are quite involved, and it just says a lot about the folks that tuned in. So, thanks for everybody for joining.
I think they can take the hard ones, the difficult ones.
I'll stop sharing my screen, and we could just focus on the three of us here. Valeda, the first one is an easy one. This is somebody that was really intrigued by your quote about, until you know how African you are, you won't know how American you are. And I'm sure maybe I got that a little bit wrong, but they wanted to know the author of that quote.
It's not a book specifically, but it's a noted quote from Dr. Robert Ferris Thompson, who's an historian, I think at Yale.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. You're a wealth of information. The next one is this person says, I think there are a lot of different ways in which folks define Black-led nonprofits. What elements do you think are most important to consider? And Aisha, maybe this one is aimed towards you.
I missed the beginning. There's a lot of elements to finding. I'm sorry.
So they're saying that they believe that there's a lot of different ways in which folks define Black-led nonprofits. So I'm thinking what they're talking about is like the CEO,
Yeah,
the board, the people in leadership. So just curious if you have reflections on that.
absolutely. So currently, Giving Gap focuses on Black founded nonprofits. Though we also catalog Black-led nonprofits and are, creating another part of our platform that focuses on that. We also allow legacy organizations that have been, maybe they were not Black-founded, but have been Black-led for some time. So yes, there are multiple different definitions. When I was part of Meyer Foundation in DC, created an initiative called the Fund for Black-led Change, where we had a definition. There's, lots of different conversations. For us, what I like to ask, and did the same thing at Meyer Foundation, is kind of three different categories. One, who was it founded by? Is that a Black person, or if it was a collective, was that majority Black? If the board, what's the representation of the board? Is the board majority Black-led? And then also, who are the constituents and volunteers and staff, and how many of those folks are Black, and what say do they have in the strategy and leadership as well? We collect information on all of those, so you can kind of check all that apply. And then we try to be able to share that information back out to people that are searching on the platform. So yes, I think there are a lot of definitions. I don't know that we'll ever get to the point where there's one, shared definition across the sector of philanthropy. What I do think is important that organizations are transparent about how they're defining it.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. This next one is one that I would say is probably pretty difficult, and it's quite technical. I have my own reflections I can answer, and then Aisha and Valeda, if you have thoughts, you're welcome to join in as well. This person says, I work on recommendation algorithms for charities and crowdfunding at a tech company. How can we surface giving opportunities in a fairer way? And personally, I love this question because you don't want to be the kingmaker where it's, hey, all of the popular organizations continue to get funding, but of course you also want to give folks, essentially what they're looking for as well. And so, my own reflection on this is if you go to a Charity Navigator list of nonprofits, what we've learned is that when you have maybe a top 10 list of organizations, and most of the clicks were happening to like the first three organizations. And so you can imagine, that would deprioritize all of the other deserving organizations. So one of the things that we had implemented was the essentially randomization of the list. So every time you refresh the page, you would get a different version of that. So it was a little bit more fair. And then, specifically thinking about, some of the areas that we touched on as far as, diversity, equity, inclusion, the race and ethnicities of founders or leaders of the site, I think a lot of that comes into, maybe not necessarily the algorithm, but how you present that data from like a filtering perspective. I could also see, like, if you have access to that first party data, where you see where money is going, it's interesting to surface that or plug that into your algorithm. And you might want to surface the organizations that, they're well operating, they have great performance, they're very deserving, but they're not getting the funding to be able to surface those. And to be quite plain about it, you think of like the application of like hidden gems. And so, Aisha, I think that that's a lot of the work that you're doing with smaller organizations. Some of them are even fiscally sponsored, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a matter of how you bring people's attention to those. So part of it's probably the algorithm. The other part is probably a matter of like the overall design experience. So I know that that's a pretty weighty one, but I do want to just obviously open it up to you both if you have any thoughts and reflections on how to be more equitable with how you're presenting different giving opportunities.
Mm-hmm. I think you spoke to a lot of it, Kevin, and I'm glad that you all, and I want to get too far ahead of the work that you all are doing, and not spoiling any surprises. But I think it's really important for everyone to consider what their definition is of effective. And there has long been, and when I was at Meyer Foundation, we did an entire analysis on the ways that we had defined effective, and learned that there was a lot of cultural bias in how we define an effective organization. And so I think part of that is being able to evaluate what is considered effective, and considering how that is impacting kind of the measures. And I'm talking out of school when it comes to algorithms, but I think, again, the importance of being able to present that information, as you said, Kevin, as there are more than one ways to define effective and valuable and good work, and making sure that we're presenting the fullness of those things, and recognizing some other things that are beyond kind of financial metrics or numerical metrics, or making all the widgets or the amount of dollars that an organization has coming in, being able to see some of the other ways that organizations can be successful and effective.
Right, and I would just add to that, for each of us, whether it's on a digital platform or just in our own assessment in our relationships with community, to rethink how we assess trust as well, in addition to effectiveness, who we trust, and really unpack that. I think there are a lot of biases embedded in that show up in philanthropy, and how we choose and where we choose to invest our dollars. So perhaps rethinking that, how to enter and build trusting relationships with nonprofits serving our community, and then also in how we assess risk. So think of it, kind of flip the script in terms of the opportunities we miss, the risk we take or miss, because we only want to go with the well-trusted or well-vetted organizations that are tried and true, and kind of the usual suspects in terms of who people choose to support. So I think it's a rich opportunity to rethink some of the factors that go into how we make these decisions.
Absolutely. Next question is more about how to interface with charities. So I think each of us probably has kind of our own kind of quick reflections on this. This person states that they would like to support an organization that advances educational and mentoring opportunities for Black youth in my hometown, Nashville, Tennessee. How can I find a group that does this? Or is it better to contribute to a national group and just volunteer locally? So I think there's two prongs to that. Like, how do you find that organization, develop a relationship with them, and then the contrast of, is it better to give nationally and then support locally through volunteering? So would love your reflections, and of course I have my own thoughts as well.
Well, I'll jump in first on this right off. I mentioned earlier I'm from the South, and if you're from Nashville, you're in the South, and I go local. I kind of lead with that, and certainly when you look at the national data around the dearth of dollars that come to the South, I mean, in addition to Black-led, Black-founded organizations, national dollars, particularly from foundations that come to Southern communities, it's a great inequity there. So particularly living in the South, I urge people and advocate giving locally, and that applies in other regions as well. I just know some of the data around giving in the South, and I think connecting with organizations, volunteering first, you get to know them perhaps, and having conversations with people in community that perhaps receive those services or are active with those organizations, to learn more, to really find one that aligns with your values and your interests. The more you can know and the better relationship you can build with an organization, I think you can sharpen how you invest your dollars, particularly when we have limited dollars as individuals oftentimes to give, to make sure it's aligned.
Wholeheartedly agree with Valeda around particularly organizations in the South and the lack of support that they receive, and the importance of investing in your own backyard. I personally believe in giving local and supporting, particularly if it's a service-based organization that you're looking at. If you're looking at more systemic work, sometimes that work happens nationally, and it's important to give to those organizations as well. But when you're looking at kind of community services, that type of work, I think it's really important to give locally, particularly because those organizations don't receive the support. And then, tiny plug again for Giving Gap. If you go on our platform, you can search by issue and then sort by state. And so hopefully I have too many screens going on right now to look up for you and tell you which organizations may exist. But I imagine that there must be. And if there's not, I'm going to go look and get some on our platform.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think what I would just quickly add is I connected with a philanthropist a couple of years ago through Charity Navigator, and he thought of his giving in concentric circles. So he would give like locally in his town, then he would give into his county, his state, nationally, and then internationally, and that's how he always prioritized it. So I think that's obviously something that resonated with me, and some of you that have joined, hopefully it will stick with you as well. And I see that's carried through with Valeda and Aisha as well. And my quick plug for Charity Navigator will be, we have all 1.6 million registered nonprofits in the U.S. We do have the zip code search through our advanced search field, and so you can start to see the organizations that are in your backyard. We're working with Giving Gap on getting data about the Black founded nonprofits that they've identified, and we do have that small curated list, and are certainly looking to evolve that partnership and the data that we surface here, just to drive our mission of just helping uplift organizations that need the support, as well as to give people the resources to make informed decisions. We have a couple minutes left here, a couple more questions to run through. Here's an interesting one. If you don't know where to begin with being a philanthropist and giving money, how would you suggest getting started?
I'll let you take that one.
Yeah.
I always start with just taking an internal assessment, maybe even doing your own giving biography. Jot down some of your first memories of generosity, whether you're a recipient or a giver, and reflect on, over the years, some pivotal moments when, again, you've felt like you've made a difference, or you felt someone else's philanthropy or generosity has made a difference in your life, in your experience, and chart that out over your life. And I think in that moment of reflection, you'll identify some key points and things you connect with, and use that as a starting place to where you choose to give.
I agree. I think it's important to think about what issues call you, like what are the things that make you emotional, or would keep you up at night if you heard a story about it. What are the issues that are either deeply personal or just connect with you in some way, and then find that organization that's working on those issues, get to know them, and ask what they need. Get to know them and ask, how could you be using your time, talents, or treasure to support their work? And I think being able to, when I think about my first experiences giving, it was through organizations that I got deeply connected and involved with, and before I kind of moved on to being a larger donor and philanthropist of many causes. Was to really just get invested in an organization whose mission spoke to me, that I could see and touch and feel and get engaged with and support in that way.
Yeah, my final addition to that would definitely be look for a mentor as well. If you can find somebody that is within your family, or a friend of a friend, chances are they're going to be really excited that you're interested in becoming a philanthropist, and they'll be happy to share the knowledge that they've collected. Well, we did have a couple questions that we weren't able to get to, but really appreciate everybody tuning in. If you'd like to touch base with us in the future, we're not hard to find. You can find me on Charity Navigator, and obviously Aisha through Giving Gap, and Valeda, I know you're cruising through all the social networks that we have included here as well, so people can track you down and certainly ask some questions as they continue to come up. But really appreciate everybody joining. Aisha, Valeda, you were absolutely wonderful and just absolute wealth of knowledge. And so grateful that you joined us, and hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week, and we'll look forward to future programming.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin.
Evan,
Aisha.
appreciate the part. Thank you all for listening.
Take care, everybody.